Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Combat Zone. I'm Nick, he's Joe, and this is where the enemy only has four things to say. Abandon ship, bail out, take cover, and we surrender.
Only one of four things to say.
No, they usually say them all.
Okay, but why would you abandon ship and bail out? Well, I guess you could bail out of the ship. So, although, you know, when you're at sea, bailing out actually is
means trying to save the ship. Yes, I know.
Yeah.
No, I'm including all the branches of the military here.
Take cover.
Take cover.
And we surrender. Okay,
That's right.
I guess you could. Well, you couldn't do them all at once. You'd have to do them sequentially.
Right.
Okay.
So the guy tries to fly off the sinking ship in the helicopter. It goes down, so he has to bail out once the helicopter hits the water, because bailing out of a helicopter is a bad idea.
Oh, I thought you meant bailing out the ship.
No. Ship's sinking.
That's why you're bailing it out.
That's why you're on the helicopter, and
you're heading to the lifeboats, bailing out the lifeboats.
It fails. It crashes. You bail out of the helicopter.
I'm sorry.
Swim
I'm being
to shore,
silly.
take cover, and then you realize the fight's over. You surrender.
Okay.
That's how it works in my feeble mind. Anyway, for the next half hour or so, we have a guest in studio with us. His name is Tom Harris. He is with the International Climate Science Coalition. He holds degrees in mechanical and aeronautical engineering from McMaster University.
Yay.
Welcome, Tom.
And our listeners all are familiar with Tom Harris.
Oh, yeah, but I wanted to get the introduction right at least once.
Okay.
Because every time I try to introduce Tom, I butcher it. I said, no butchery, no butcher, no. So I wrote it out. So if you hear this sound in the background, that's my page with his credentials written on it. Okay. So, Tom, we have a situation now where we've got two parties vying for leadership of this country. Tell me what the biggest difference is between their climate change policies, their environmental policies.
Well, their environmental policies are accepting climate change as a pressing and determined threat to the human race.
Climate emergency.
That's right. They have different approaches. To me, it's a little bit like you're in the Wild West and you've been charged with killing somebody, and your lawyer comes to you and says, well, you know, I think we're going to do a plea bargain here. We're going to accept that you killed that person, and we're going to ask for firing squad instead of hanging. Is that okay with you? And, you know, you say, what? Well, I didn't kill him. And, of course, that's the case. I mean, the fact is carbon dioxide, which is what both the liberals and the conservatives are calling climate pollution, carbon pollution. Of course, it's not. But regardless, they're focused on trying to stop it. They use different mechanisms, but they want to actually punish us for the crime that has not been committed of changing the Earth's climate. So I have very little patience with the conservative and liberal plans, because they're both trying to punish someone who didn't commit a crime. And in this case, it's our CO2 emissions, which are doing nothing but good. Okay? Because plants love it.
Well, Andrew Scheer wants to recommit us to our Paris Accord agreement. Under the Paris Accord agreement, what were we committed to? What is he recommitting us to?
Well, the commitment is to reduce emissions to 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. Now, I have an email here from
14 years ago.
Yeah, I have an email here from an environmental economist, an expert actually in this whole area. And he says, finally, an antidote to show how large a 30% reduction in emissions actually is. He does it from 2017 levels, of course, which would be easier. He says numerically it's 203 megatons down from 2017 levels. If the government forced the elimination of all light-duty vehicles in Canada, in other words, every car, SUV, and pickup truck, it would reduce emissions by 85 megatons. In other words, we could all go back to walking, cycling, and riding horses, and it would not get us even halfway to our 2030 target. So the sad thing is the Parliamentary Budget Office has said they're going to have to increase the cost of the carbon tax to $102, I believe is the number here. I'll just double check.
I thought it was almost $200.
It's $102 by 2030 to ensure Canada hits its Paris targets. That's what they just said.
Okay.
Now, the funny thing is, Catherine McKenna says they have no intention, the environment minister says they have no intention of raising beyond the targets they have now, which is $50 by 2020 something or other. But they are going to meet their Paris targets. So she's saying 2 + 2 = 16?
Well, the first question that comes to my mind when I listen to this is how?
Yeah.
Look, first of all, slapping an extra nickel on the price of fuel didn't do it's a carbon cash grab is what it is, because it doesn't. what happens is if you really begin to change people's behavior, okay, and it make them drive less because the price of fuel is so expensive, which is the whole point of adding taxes. They try to discourage smoking by adding sin taxes to it. People still smoke, they still drink, they just grumble about it every time they pay it at the till. So if you transfer that over to gasoline, now you've got people who are trying to make a living, and think of the thousands of different occupations, not just truck drivers, who make a living in their vehicles, everything from salesmen to
taxi drivers. So they're going to hate this.
The list is long and grievous.
I think, Nick, that the problem is even worse than what you're saying. I don't accept the premise of any of this stuff because I travel a fair amount, and I don't just mean in North America. So here in Canada and in the United States, people like to complain about how high their cost of gas is to run their cars. But fly over to Europe where they're paying 2, 3, 4 times as much, or in the Middle East and Israel where they're paying, $6 or some dollars a gallon. And guess what? People are still driving their cars.
Yeah.
Yes, it's true that it's an added cost, and it's true that people have to pay attention to it, but they don't stop driving their internal combustion vehicles. They just adapt. They spend less money in other areas. So it's not a given that if you continue to increase the price of fuel, that people are all of a sudden going to proportionately reduce their fuel consumption. That's a fallacy. It's an assumption that actually doesn't bear itself out in the real world.
Well, the other thing people have forgotten, I'm going to let you get back in on this. You are the guest,
right? Because you're the guest. We might as well be listening to you.
That's right. But the point I want to make is that people have forgotten why we use fossil fuels in the first place. Like, how do we get into this mess? If they tried to bring gasoline on today, it would never pass the safety regulations. But it's been with us for well over 100 years now. And the reason we use it is because other than nuclear power, it provides the most amount of energy in the smallest package. Mm-hmm. That's why nothing else can replace it on a massive scale. Yes, electric cars. But the problem with electric cars is, where do they get their electricity from?
Yeah, exactly.
Usually, if not from hydroelectric dams, it's either nuclear or some kind of fossil fuel generation station.
Yeah. Well, one of the things,
there's also the infrastructure problem as well. I mean, right now our electrical grid is built based on certain assumptions, and powering all of our energy needs is not one of them.
No, it was never intended for that.
One of the things people don't realize is whether wind and solar actually make any sense, even economically, if you ignore the bird kills and the other environmental impacts, depends on two things. One is where it's made and how it's made, and where it's used and how it's used. Because, for example, if you make wind turbines in China, their primary electricity source is coal, okay? The rare earth metals that are used in the supermagnets for wind turbines are mined primarily in China under terrible environmental conditions.
Okay? And Africa.
Yeah, but mostly China. And interestingly, the materials used for the solar panel industry is largely coming from China as well. China is by far the biggest producer, I understand. And consumer, too. They actually do use a lot of it. So I attended a presentation from Dr. Elizabeth Anderson at Carleton University, and she was showing that, for example, if you make solar panels in China under terrible environmental conditions, and then you use them in Germany, which uses them a lot, where they have a lot of clouds, and it's a northern country, it makes no sense. Okay, no sense at all. The only way that it could make sense, if you ignore the fact that it's going to have no impact on climate, and of course, it has other environmental problems, is if you made it with hydropower in Norway, and then use the solar panels, in Australia. Okay, in the outback. So there are ways that you could actually make some sense out of this. But sadly, the major producer is China, and the major consumer outside of China, I understand, is Germany, or at least they're right near the top. So they have it all backwards.
Listen, if somebody wants to put up a solar power or a little wind turbine to run a cabin in the woods, I got no problem with that.
Sure.
I would do the same thing.
Especially if you're off the grid.
Absolutely. But it's the commercial-sized problem that we have.
Yeah.
Like when I went down to southern Ontario here for a funeral recently, once we got down to around Chatham, it was nothing but a forest of these things, and at least 10 or 15% of them weren't working at all.
Yeah, and there's a bat kill problem, which is huge. Okay, I mean, a lot of birds are killed, but bat kills are even a lot worse. And the interesting thing is that bats don't actually have to be hit by the blades to be killed.
Just the sonic.
They just have to go near the blade where the pressure drops so much it damages the inner parts of their brain or their ears. I'm not sure the exact biology, but it kills them just due to the sudden drop in pressure.
Yeah.
And there are millions and millions of bats being killed all over the world. Now, this is bad news because they are a major consumer of mosquitoes. Okay, typical
Hello,
battle.
malaria. Welcome back.
Yeah, that's right. Typically, they'll eat 1,000 mosquitoes in a night, I understand. And, bats are our friends. The last thing we want to do is kill them all. But, going back to the targets that are being set for Canada, it's quite funny to actually look at previous targets. Were any met? From 1984 to 1993, we had a target to reduce emissions to 20% below 1988 levels by 2005. 1993 to 2006, we were going to go to an average of 6% below 1990 levels between 2008 and 2000. And, it goes on and on and on each year. I mean, it seems like there's new targets. But if you actually look at the graph, and I'm holding it up here, you can see that we've had a general slow rise. And of course, that's to be expected. Not only is our economy developing, but our population is growing. So, I mean, along with these kinds of climate plans, they'd have to have a sudden restriction in immigration because that's a major source of our population growth. So the bottom line is that these targets don't make any sense. They don't ever hit them. They don't even come close, but they're doing it to get enviros off their back for the day. The trouble is they're going to be on their back 10 times harder in the future when they don't even come close to hitting the targets. So Andrew Scheer and Trudeau are saying what they hope will get them through the day, maybe the month, but in the long run, Suzuki and company will come after them really hard because they're not going to hit their targets now either.
This is why I really wish a politician would stand up and say, you guys have been wrong every single major prediction in the last 40 years. Now get out of my face.
Yeah, exactly.
Just look, we've had enough because you're not right.
And the funny thing is, I don't really think they're taking it that seriously because, for example, in this article by the Ottawa News Bureau, they say Scheer was not present for the vote, nor was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau or NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, as they were all in Toronto for the NBA Raptors victory parade. So here we have what they're calling a national climate emergency.
Right, this was the vote on the motion declaring the emergency that you're referring to.
That's right.
Right.
And none of the top three leaders were even there.
Right.
And of course,
Elizabeth Bay was there.
She was there. I wouldn't call her one of the top leaders.
True enough. And Maxime Bernier was there as well.
Exactly.
He voted against.
Yeah, it's good to see that. But, the Liberals were being criticized by the Conservatives, left, right, and center for jetting back and forth. I'll get you some of their quotes later because they are, so they essentially buy the Kool-Aid too, even though they did, to their credit, vote against this motion. I should just read the summary of the motion because it's a long thing, too long to read on air. The purpose of this enactment is to ensure that Canada meets its global climate change obligations under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change by committing to a long-term target. Oh, another target. Okay, we're going to have another target that we're not going to hit. To reduce Canadian domestic greenhouse gas emissions to a level that is at least 80% below 1990 levels by the year 2050. And by establishing interim targets for the period 2020 to 2045. So I suppose if you're all going to be gone by 2050, you can commit to anything. But an 80% reduction is absurd. And of course would put us largely back into the Stone Age.
Well, I hope you like horses and buggies and burning firewood because you're gonna end up in the 1850s.
Yeah, exactly.
If we do this, well, we're not going to do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have to realize that 80% roughly of Canada and the United States' greenhouse gas emissions is plant food. It's carbon dioxide. And a lot of the plants in our environment today evolved at a time when CO2 levels were triple what they are now. And that's why they pump it into greenhouses, because plants grow better and they need less water. So as the CO2 level in the atmosphere rises, we're going to be able to start farming in places that previously were too dry. So there's a lot of benefits to CO2 rise. If it doubles and triples, hooray. have no effect on us. Just in the time that we've sat in this room, levels have probably gone from, say, 450, a little higher than outside because we're inside. Outside is about 410. I'll bet it's gone up to about 600. I was in a conference the other day.
You're talking about in this room alone.
Yeah, that's right. I was at a conference back in September in Oakland, and one of the speakers had a CO2 meter. And he held it up during the meeting, and it was over 900. And he said, "Oh yeah, we're all dying here." So,
well, not necessarily dying, but suffering from internal climate change.
Oh, that's right, of course.
Right. Yeah.
But we don't see
give many more fun stuff to play with.
We don't see it warming in a greenhouse because CO2 is high. We see it because of the solid roof preventing convection of the hot air out. So, in fact, the whole idea of greenhouse effect is wrong also. A greenhouse does not heat because of CO2.
No.
Although it does grow its plants a lot better.
That's interesting because it occurred to me recently, and, I like to think these things through, and I'm surprised that this had not occurred to me beforehand. But if CO2 is a greenhouse gas, allegedly, and the effect on the climate is a greenhouse effect, that would be global warming. Okay, so how do you explain climate change that's global cooling? Because the reason we've moved away from global warming as the crisis is because the data doesn't support that anymore, that the world is warming. And so some of the cooling trends, et cetera, that we're seeing are now, I'm hearing people say, well, that's climate change. And of course, that's all due to CO2. And my answer to that, or my question is, but how could that be due to CO2 if CO2 is a greenhouse gas and we're worried about the greenhouse effect? The greenhouse effect would exclusively be global warming.
Well, they say that there's all kinds of secondary effects, like the breakdown in the polar vortex, which allows cold air from the Arctic to leak down into the south. They have to be very creative to try to find ways that warming gas, which, there is a certain amount of warming due to CO2, but it's very small if you think about it. It has to be small because since 1880, we've had over a 40% rise in carbon dioxide. And yet the global average temperature, which is kind of a fictitious statistic,
right?
But regardless, the thing
Glad you're pointing that out.
Yeah, that has gone up according to NASA, and NASA are among the climate alarmists, unfortunately, by just over 1 degree C. Okay, and that's been a good thing because we've been coming out of the Little Ice Age, but. So if you see a 40% rise and that small a change, then what's the problem for the future? What they're saying is, oh yeah, CO2 effect is diminishing, in fact, as CO2 rises because it's a logarithmic response. In other words, we have to double and triple and quadruple it to get significant impact. But they say, oh yeah, but there's secondary effects. For example, according to the people who think that we are going to cause dangerous climate change, as the Earth warms up a little because of CO2, you're going to have more water vapor evaporating, and water vapor, it's a greenhouse gas. That will magnify. That's a positive feedback. And those things taken together, they say, will result in danger. The trouble is, you see, when you evaporate water, you don't just make water vapor, you also make
clouds.
Exactly. And what do clouds do?
Deflect the sun's energy.
Exactly, and they cool the planet. So it's not a simple feedback mechanism. In fact, we really don't understand the climate well enough to forecast what's going to happen, let alone control it. Chris Essex makes the point that we don't. He's a professor of mathematics at University of Western Ontario, and he's an expert in climate models. He says we do not have a theory of climate. We really don't know how to actually program the computer models to forecast climate because we don't have a theory of climate. Right. So what they do is they put in the assumptions, right. And they do curve fitting based on past data to try to forecast future data. But that doesn't work because we don't know what's going to happen in the future.
Just ask any investor in the stock market.
That's right. There are lots of effects that occur in nature that are not forecastable from a direct linear forecast.
There's too many inputs.
That's right. Think about it. If you have a nozzle that goes from large to small to large, until we finally got enough pressure that we could get it choking at the throat, where it became sonic, okay, I got to the speed of sound at the throat, we didn't know that you could get subsonic flow when the nozzle's big, down to choking, Mach 1 at the throat, and then when it expanded back again, it didn't slow down. It didn't. It accelerated to supersonic, because that is what occurs in a nozzle where you have enough pressure at the
Venturi effect.
Yeah, exactly. Now, that is an obvious example of where subsonic theory projected to the future, projected to higher flow rates, didn't work because there was a sudden trip point. You see this in hydraulic jumps. If you go to the Rideau River, okay, just underneath a weir, the water is zooming along and you assume it's going to stay at the same height. Nope, there's a hydraulic jump because there's a sudden step change in nature at that point. And those kinds of things are not easily forecast unless you have a theory that actually works. And since we don't have a theory of climate, we can't really forecast the future other than saying that, well, the major driver of climate, which is the sun, is going into a cool phase around 2060. And if we have similar conditions to what happened last time it did that, grand solar minimum they call it, we're going to see temperatures that are much colder. So generally speaking, I'm finding that scientists are agreeing on that one of the major drivers of warming is going to be cooling, and that is the sun. But overall, we don't know what's going to happen, so we should reduce energy consumption and save, reduce pollution and all that. Those make sense. But the idea that, according to this report here, the National Climate Emergency has this statement. It's a real and urgent crisis driven by human activity. Those are the exact words. But we don't know that. That's crazy. And Andrew Scheer and others should be simply saying that. They used to in the old Canadian Alliance.
Well, the other thing is, for the sake of the discussion, not that I believe this for a second, but for the sake of the discussion, let's say that the chicken littles running around screaming the sky is falling crowd are right. Okay, the planet is getting warm. Okay, wouldn't it make more sense to adapt to it rather than try to stop it? Show me an example of where man messed around with nature and it came out really well.
Yeah, well,
good luck with that.
The warming is very small, but a friend of mine from India, he laughs. He says, you Canadians are crazy. We've had more warming in India than the average in the world, and we've had the green revolution. They're booming. They're doing really well. Warming is good for humanity. If you look at the medical journals, what you find is there's much more people killed due to cold weather than warm weather. Now, I mean, that doesn't, and the warming is forecast to occur most at night in the winter in the northern and very far southern latitudes. So I can't think of any life form that would care if it was minus 50 instead of minus 60, So, I mean, if that's where most of the warming is going to occur, then
bring it on.
So what?
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, they're saying now that I was reading an article this morning or yesterday about how the glue that holds the permafrost together is coming undone. So what?
Well, if it is, and undoubtedly, parts of the Arctic are warming, parts of the Arctic are cooling. So we should go north and not say to these people, aha, we're going to reduce greenhouse gases so this won't happen to your great-grandchildren. They need help now, okay? So there are real cases where people's homes are falling down because the permafrost... Well, then help them.
But that's adaptation.
That's exactly right. And similarly, in Ottawa, they did a study a little while ago, in 2011, I believe it was, how much would it cost to bury cables underground so that when we have a tornado or some major event, we don't lose power as much? Apparently, it's $2 to $5 million per kilometer to take standing cables that are already above ground and put them underground. They decided they didn't have the funds. But the climate tax, the carbon tax, is apparently going to suck $10 billion out of the Canadian economy in 2022. That would pay for 2,000 kilometers of underground cable. So, yeah, we have the money to make society more robust. We just spend it on the wrong stuff.
Well, this is a good example of this is Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, right? The problem with the flooding of New Orleans was not because of the hurricane. So you can't stop hurricanes. What you have to do is you have to ensure that the levees are going to be able to hold. Same thing, when we look locally at the flooding of the Ottawa River, which absurdly has been blamed on climate change as well. But if that was true, and I'm not suggesting this, but if it were true, and we were concerned that this might be an annual event, then how about, first of all, not building houses in floodplains? I think that's probably the prudent thing to do to start with. But in those areas where you really are concerned about flooding, how about building up the embankments so that you actually don't have to go out on an emergency basis every year and try to pack sandbags to stop the river from overflowing its banks? There are things you can do to adapt, as you're saying, but I want to get back to the political angle for a minute on this, because I think that's sort of the current thing right now. The idea that we have this, now we have Parliament has declared a climate change emergency. You said something really interesting a few minutes ago, Tom, about the Canadian Alliance, how when the Canadian Alliance, which was a precursor to the current Conservative Party, which was the merger of the Progressive Conservative Party and the Canadian Alliance back in 2002 or 2004, I can't remember what year, but around that time. So just talk a little bit about what the position of the Canadian Alliance was and how this whole debate was playing out at that time.
Yeah, exactly. I was the legislative assistant for Bob Mills, who was the opposition senior environment critic. And Bob was doing a great job actually presenting real science. And he actually had that long filibuster where he went on for many hours. That's what you call it, a filibuster?
Filibuster, right.
Where he actually tried to delay, Canada's movement forward. I believe it was on the Kyoto. And they didn't, of course, because Chrétien said that the debate in Commons was just a formality and they would approve it. And apparently the Prime Minister only just has to sign documents like that in the presence of, I think it's 3 cabinet ministers.
It's an order in council.
Right. So he said that the vote was just a formality. But regardless, Bob wasn't successful in stopping it, but he did bring in really good science. Okay, Stockwell Day, actually, a few years previous, gave one of the absolute best speeches, perhaps the best speech. I think it was 1997. At the time Kyoto was being signed in Japan, he wrote a phenomenal speech. And nobody burned his house down. Okay, so I mean, it can be done. And a lot of people were very pleased to have this brought out. In fact, back, I think it was 2005, they had Tim Patterson and other scientists appear before the Commons Committee. The Senate Committee with Nancy Green-Rain, they brought in several people like Patterson again. So the people are prepared to come, in this case, just down the street from Ottawa U and Carleton. Ian Clark at Ottawa U, a climatologist or paleoclimatologist, he studies it over long periods. They can come down and give support if the politicians make sensible statements. It's not as if these people are way out in left field and there's so few of them, because something called Climate Change Reconsidered, which is put out by the non-governmental International Panel on Climate Change, and people can check it on the web, climatechangereconsidered.org. It cites literally thousands of peer-reviewed references from leading scientists around the world that say that the climate scare is either dead wrong or it's just unknown. And I gave a copy of that report, one of them, a 1,000-page report, plus a summary, because I knew she wouldn't read the whole summary. I gave it personally to Catherine McKenna when I met her after Town Hall a year and a half ago. And her major comment was that it was heavy to carry to her car. So sadly, and the sad thing is, much as I found her a pleasant person to talk to, she had no clue as to the fact that there were many scientists who disagreed with what she was saying.
That's why we call her Climate Barbie.
Well, she had been sheltered. Yeah, she'd been sheltered. All right,
fine. I call her Climate Barbie.
But it's that's an interesting, way of putting it, and we get a chuckle out of it. But it's really a very serious situation where this is arguably, rightly or wrongly, it's become almost the policy issue of the day. Okay, this is the flavor of the month. They're spending a whole lot of taxpayers' money, and this has implications in a wide range of policy that has nothing directly to do necessarily with climate and environment. And we're just rushing headlong into this. And people that we know don't believe it, number one, aren't willing to stand up and argue the other side of the point. And the consequence of that is that, and by the way, I'm referring to a lot of conservatives, as I look through the list of people who vote for this stuff, I'm going, okay, that person, these are people that I know personally are at a minimum skeptical, okay, but they won't stand up for it. And the consequence of that is that the general public, who really are being alarmed, aren't hearing that there's another side to the story.
Yeah,
and I recently had a lunch at our home, where a few of our guests we started talking about climate change, and I started citing some of the reports that were challenging this stuff, and they were going, well, I never heard about that. I never heard that there was. It wasn't that I didn't hear about this report. I didn't hear that there was anybody who was saying that there was another side to this argument.
Yeah.
They were genuinely surprised, if not shocked, that there is alternative information out there.
Well, and also, Joseph, it is really important for the Conservatives to bring it up. I mean, often you'll hear from their backroom people, years ago, that they can't bring it up because public doesn't support it. But they have it backwards. And in fact, there was a study done by Drexel University, McGill University, and Ohio State University. It was called Shifting Public Opinion on Climate Change, an empirical assessment of factors influencing concern over climate change in the U.S. And this was their conclusion. They said that the stated opinion of politicians and other elites in society is the major factor driving public opinion. Okay? So what it means is this. When the Republicans and the Democrats worked together on climate change, there was a much higher percentage of the population who felt that there was a climate crisis. When the Republicans split from the Democrats, that came way down. Okay? Because people recognized there was an alternative point of view. So the fact is, the Conservatives have a responsibility to lead the public, not to just follow public opinion polls, because the primary driver of a public opinion polls is, in fact, the stated opinions of the Conservatives and other elites in society.
Right.
And in fact, that's what we elect them for. Okay? I mean, the bottom line is if all we needed was public opinion polls to drive policy, we could just simply take the policy off the opinion poll.
Well, Tom, it's been a pleasure as always. That's a half an hour.
Wow.
Come and gone. And it's always enlightening to listen to you chat. And I try to stay out of the way as much as I can because you bring with you so much quality information to the table. So I look forward to hearing you again real soon. Thank you for joining us.
Before we wrap up this segment, is it fair to talk about to let people know that coming soon, Tom, you're going to be doing your own podcast?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's going to be great.
Yeah. I think it's fair to say that, just to prime people that they should be on the lookout for it.
Yeah, I'll be doing an introduction.
In that case, then let's tell them that Tom has his own podcast coming, and it'll be covering a lot of this ground on a regular basis. We'll be he'll be running his own show, and probably a half hour or whatever podcast, so you can download it and listen to it anytime you want. When you need your dose of sanity, when it comes to the climate, you know where to go and get it.
And if you want to hear something exciting about the future of space travel, I'm going to cover that too, with even a bit of music.
Well, listen, I tell you what.
All right, we're looking forward to it. Tom, it's been great having you on again. And once you start your own podcast, I hope that doesn't mean that you won't be coming on as a guest with us from time to time still.
Sure.
Because we always love to have you. Okay, we're going to go for a break now, so we'll be back in a couple of minutes here in the Combat Zone on the Think Radio Network. Okay, welcome back. Segment number 2 in the Combat Zone. I'm Joe, he's Nick.
The Combat Zone.
And Nick's going crazy.
No, I'm not.
And we're here in Bunker B in a hidden location somewhere around Canada's nation capital.
Yes, and we're not telling you where it is.
And was glad Tom was able to drop by. He is a great source of knowledge, great interview. And I'm really looking forward to his show once he gets his own podcast up and running. And, of course, you'll be able to listen to that right here on the Think Radio Network website, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I was trying to think of something else to say. Nick, by the way, let me just take a second, I was looking at, by the way, in case you guys don't know, what we've been trying to do, and we haven't been doing it regularly, but we've been trying to, when we think about it, to do a preview of the upcoming show on Facebook Live. And Nick has done a few more of these than I have. I've done, I think, a couple now. And I don't know whether they really help or not, but, if anyone out there actually catches these on Facebook Live, just put a comment up. We'd love to hear what you think of them. But I just want to say, Nick, that I was watching mine from earlier today, just rewatching it, and it was reminding me of how I have a face for radio. Now, it's odd because, the angle's a little off because of the way that the computer is sitting on an angle of it.
And you're always your own harshest critic.
Well, that's true, too. And, of course, I should prepare people in advance to tell them, I have a big beard. Some people say an epic beard, but if you're an epic beard grower, my beard is not epic. But it's not.
You're not Duck Dynasty territory yet.
No, for some of them I am, but not for some of the other ones.
I'm thinking of the old man.
Wouldn't go into a beard contest or anything like that, but some people do. Anyway, okay, so let's shift gears a little bit, somewhat, because really, when you think about once we get into this particular subject, I think that, we could find some similarities between the whole climate change debate and this particular topic. And Nick, I thought that we should discuss a little bit the Michael Cooper affair and what I've called, or what I'm calling, political correctness run amok or out of control. Now, for our listeners who aren't familiar with what went on here, so Michael Cooper is a backbench member of Parliament in Canada. He's a member of the Conservative Party, and he was also a member of the Standing Committee on Justice for the House of Commons. And they were debating some stuff around the Human Rights Code and free speech, etc. I don't recall the exact legislative issue that they were looking at, but they had in witnesses who were testifying before the committee, and one of the witnesses happened to be somebody who is a human rights advocate on behalf of the Muslim community here in Canada. And this particular person was, in their presentation, they were talking about how the right, or the alt-right, which is a term that I
still haven't seen a definition that makes any sense out of that.
Well, it's meant to be a derogatory term.
Well, that's okay.
So the alt-right, or the right, are these extremists, Nazi-like, etc. And this particular witness also brought up the person who attacked a mosque in Quebec City here in Canada, the person who attacked a synagogue, shot synagogue worshippers in the United States recently, and the shooter in Christchurch, New Zealand, who attacked, I believe it was 2 mosques, and killed a total of 51 people, or more than 50 people. It might have been 53. I apologize for not being perfectly accurate on that, but you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so when this person was finished, Michael Cooper was quite upset, and I think justifiably so, because I'm getting tired of, like clearly he was, of people characterizing conservatives like you and I, Nick, of being extremist because we're conservative, of being Nazis because we're conservative, or tending toward Nazism, or that kind of thing. So what Mr. Cooper did was he called this person out on it. He said, something along the lines of, shame on you for saying this kind of stuff. And in his response, he read part of the manifesto of this shooter from Christchurch, New Zealand, who justified what he did, or what he was about to do, as an act of a leftist. In other words, he was very much a follower and an adherent of Maoist theory. He liked Mao Zedong, who, of course, we all know, or should know, that was the leader
one
of
the greatest
communist
butchers ever to walk the planet
in China, the original communist leader in China, and he went out of his way in his manifesto to say how much he disliked conservatives. He was not a conservative.
Well, on top of that,
let me just finish, just to lay this out, okay?
Okay.
I think this is important.
Okay, go ahead.
So he was, after Michael Cooper was finished reading this into the record, and castigating this witness for having, I think, shamefully said what he said about conservatives, that he was then attacked by fellow members of the Justice Committee. The leader, subsequent to this, the leader of the Conservative Party in Canada, Andrew Scheer, removed him from his committee position, and then subsequent to all of this, the members of the Justice Committee apparently were so offended and so worried about this terrible thing that Michael Cooper did, reading this part of this manifesto into the record, that they actually voted to remove from the official record the transcript of the proceedings of the Justice Committee, the whole episode. In other words, they expunged the record. Now, I have to say this. I know it took me a couple of minutes here to go through the whole scenario to lay it out, but I happen to think that this is terrible and dangerous on so many levels. First of all, I think that Cooper was right. Now, I don't know. I didn't see the video, and frankly, I didn't read the transcript before it was expunged, so I don't really know what the exact terminology he said. So it's possible that he expressed himself inelegantly and perhaps even inappropriately. I doubt that that's the case, but because I don't have the transcript in front of me, I'm prepared to say maybe that was a problem.
Yep.
But the substance of what he said, that it's time for people to stop accusing without any justification, automatically, those of us who happen to be on the right of the political spectrum, of being racist, of being hate mongers, of being akin to National Socialists, Nazis, okay? It's time to stop talking about this vague terminology, which is meant as a derogatory term, the alt-right, of which you and I have been accused of being members. I don't even know what it means.
Well, that was my comment earlier, yeah.
We're, in fact, leaders of the alt-right in Canada.
Apparently.
Okay. And I don't know, maybe we should get some T-shirts made up. I'm an alt-righter.
How about a paycheck?
Yeah, I'll take a paycheck from the alt-right community, too. Send your donations here.
That's right.
Okay. So I think he was right. And I think that the best evidence that he could have presented was the statements of this awful person who committed this heinous crime in New Zealand, where he adamantly said that he is not a conservative, he hates conservatives, and where he goes on in his manifesto to lay praise on the left and on dictatorships like the communist dictatorship in China. So I think Michael Cooper was right. So that's the first thing. And to be forcibly removed, to be fired from the Justice Committee because of this, I mean, words fail me. Well, not words. Polite words fail me.
Let's go back a little bit. First of all, this idea that somehow Nazis were a right-wing organization. I know what Wikipedia says, but Wikipedia, anybody can edit. And you can write in there anything you want to. So and it's one of the reasons why it's not a really reliable source. There's some stuff it's good for, but when it comes to political points of view, forget it. It's garbage. I mean, if you wanted to go to the climate science, go to climate change and start putting some real facts in there, within a couple of days it's edited out. They don't want that point of view. So the whole point I make when I have this discussion with people is that Hitler was a lefty. And they all, oh my God, it's like I have just said that Satan is my savior or something, insane thing. And my answer to them is, look, first of all, they call themselves socialists. And they say, well, he didn't really mean it. Well, wait a minute. If my name is Fred and I start calling myself Fred and then later change it to Barney,
well, whatever they call,
I'm still the same person.
Well, the fact that they called themselves socialists was actually one of the most honest and accurate things that they were doing.
But more than that,
they absolutely were. National Socialist Germany was absolutely a socialist country.
Well, but the question then becomes, okay, so what's in the name? All right. So let's take that argument out, because you could also say, well, does that mean that the Democratic Republic of the Congo is democratic because it has the word democratic in it? No. they just stick labels on. So let's look instead at the policies. There's an old saying, what you do speaks so loudly, what you say I cannot hear. When you look at the things that Hitler and the Nazis promoted, they were into eugenics. They were into racial purity. They were into all kinds of stuff. Gun control. One of the very first things they did whenever they invaded and took over territory was strip the population of its firearms. All of them, right down to pellet guns. You were not allowed to have a pellet gun. So the whole point was those policies, if you look at what's going on today in the world under left-wing governments, I'm not going to call them Nazis, but there's a lot of similarities.
Well, it's important for people to understand, even in the area of domestic policy, that the National Socialists in Germany, that Germany under the rule of the National Socialists was a welfare state. It was a super welfare state. And there were two differences between the National Socialists in Germany and the communists in the Soviet Union at that time. They were both fascist states, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Both of them are fascist states. The difference between the German form of fascism and what's being described as something different, communism of the Soviet Union, which is just another form of fascism, is that the Germans there were two things. Number one, they were not internationalists, they were nationalist. So they weren't interested in exporting their revolution. Okay, they were very focused on their own nation and their own quote-unquote race. So that was different from the communists in the Soviet Union, which was an internationalist focus.
Oh, very
and
much so,
they
yes.
wanted to export the revolution to other countries. So that's one difference. The second difference is that the Nazis allowed private ownership, as opposed to the communists who ended private ownership of property and industry, etc. But the actual de jure ownership of the economy and property is irrelevant if the economy is still being controlled and dictated to by the central government, which is what happened in Germany. So it may be that individuals were still able to own private property and still able to own private industry, but that industry was highly regulated by the central government. The government decided what they had to produce and how much of, and if you didn't listen to what the government was telling you what to do, then they were prepared to nationalize. So these are superficial differences between the two. Now, it's an interesting topic, and it wasn't necessarily what we wanted to get into fully, but I'm glad you brought it up, Nick, because there is a reason why the National Socialists became, in academic circles, the extreme right, and the communists were on the left. And that's because the academia in the Western world in the years immediately following the Second World War were largely socialists themselves,
right,
who, by the way, were very big believers and defenders of National Socialist Germany when Germany was attacking everybody else except communist Soviet Union, and they turned on a dime. So they were blood brothers until that happened, and then all of a sudden they were the enemy. But of course, you had to differentiate between the two in terms of political systems. So that played a very important role. And now, I can't remember his name, and I will find it. I will put it up on Facebook and put it on the website. But there is actually a very good academic study on this. And this is becoming more and more understood in academic circles about the similarities between fascism and communism and how they have the same roots. But and in many cases, the same practices. But the name of the book is Liberal Fascism. And it's I can't remember who it was
I can tell
that
you in
wrote
a second,
it, but
because I have the book
that's
at
right.
home.
Well, here we have computers in front of us, right? And
Well,
now,
the
while
reason-
Nick's looking that up, I want to get back to the Michael Cooper affair, because there was something else about this that has nothing necessarily to do with the actual subject matter, whether he expressed himself elegantly or not, whether or not what he said was appropriate or not appropriate, but the fact that the committee voted to expunge the record. Now, that, from a purely, forget about ideology or anything like that, that to me is really problematic, because people are going to think, okay, well, this guy was kicked out of the committee, and in the future, people are going to go, why? And there might be references to it, but there is no more historical record of what actually happened in that committee meeting.
Right.
That led to his being disciplined. And
this is like going around.
It's literally rewriting history.
It's like going around collecting all the copies of Mein Kampf and burning them so that no one will ever have to read the terrible things that Hitler wrote.
So how do you learn from history if you
destroy it or twist it or hide it?
Now, we were talking
the Soviets did this all the time.
Well, this is what I'm going to say, exactly. Now, while we're on the subject of practices that are similar to the old Soviet Union, okay, when Stalin became the leader of the Soviet Union, or the de facto leader of the Soviet Union, and a number of the older Politburo members who had been around in Lenin's time were being arrested and executed under Stalin's reign, what would happen is, if you looked at the pictures, historical pictures that were available in textbooks and things like that at the time, what things that predated the execution of some of these people showed them in pictures, parades and things like that with Lenin, who was still, quote unquote, a national hero. But then newer pictures after their execution would show the same pictures, and with Stalin and Lenin, etc. But these people had been removed; they'd been erased as if they didn't even exist.
Right.
So, even here in Canada, and of course, I'm not going to suggest that we're anything like communist.
Yeah, we're not trying to say that we're Soviet Union or Nazi Germany.
No, but it's that's the kind of thing that they engaged in there. Now, here, people are doing it. I don't think they're doing it for nefarious reasons.
I don't think they know any better.
Because they don't know any better, and they're not even thinking about it.
Here's the name of the book. It's written by Jonah Goldberg.
Goldberg, that's who it is.
Liberal Fascism, The Secret History of the American Left from Mussolini to the Politics of Meaning. I've read 90% of that book.
It's a fascinating.
It's a terrifying read. Because I'll tell you, who, when you read this, Woodrow Wilson, they consider him the first socialist dictator in North America. He copied a lot of the stuff that was okay. I'm not going to try to, because it's been a while since I read it, but excuse me, this whole ISO 9002 program we have going on originates with Woodrow Wilson and his Blue Eagle campaign, where the government could only buy from government approved businesses, and in order to get that, there were certain things you had to do, all kinds of different things. The idea of the little corner store butcher shop, okay, which had existed for hundreds of years. And if people had a bad butcher who didn't keep his place clean and people got sick, the guy didn't stay in business. He was gone. So it was self-regulating. But the big packing houses didn't want the competition. So they started insisting on inspections and higher standards that they could afford, but the little guy couldn't. Anyway, this is just as an example.
Right.
That book is well worth the money, well worth the read. Add it to your library. Now, one of the other things about this whole Mr. Cooper's story is we have come to a point now where just by being honest and telling the truth, that old saying, speaking truth to power? Well, that's what he did. And he got burnt at the stake for it, because his career is now damaged. First of all, his words, as recorded by the committee, have been removed. When people hear about him, they won't know why it was removed, because there is no historical record. They'll just know he'd gotten the boot from a very influential committee.
And I can find, I want to reiterate this, I can find no indication of racism or intolerance or prejudice or anything inappropriate in what he said. I can find nothing that is objectionable.
Well, the question becomes, who decides what's objectionable? And this goes back to Jordan Peterson and who talking about what language we are allowed to use. Not only what we can't say, but what we must say. So there's so much wrong, so much sickness in what we're doing these days. It really is terrifying.
I'm laughing because Nick's chewing on a piece of banana bread at the same time.
It's delicious.
Anyway.
My wife made it for me, and she's such a good cook.
Okay, that took away from the seriousness, I think, of the subject, and it is a serious subject. So there, as I said right at the beginning of my rant on this, it is all of this is wrong on so many levels. Punishing Michael Cooper for saying what he said or doing what he did, reading into the record part of the manifesto of this, as I say, this awful person from New Zealand who committed this heinous crime. Okay, that's not defending him. And it's interesting that the government, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, immediately after the shooting, one of the very first things that she did was she said, we're not going to even mention his name and we're not going to publicize or talk about what he wrote. And, if I was a conspiracy theorist, Nick, if I was a skeptical person, more so than I really am, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, by the way, on any level, but you have to ask yourself, why were these people so quick to jump on this? Oh, we're going to suppress this manifesto. We're not going to allow it to be read by anybody, etc. Okay. Was that because of the awful things that this guy was saying? Or was that because of the left-wing things that he was saying that don't fit into the left-wing narrative of conservatives being right-wing extremists?
Here it is from my perspective. If you are listening to Mr. Cooper and you're being called on your use of disgusting terms to describe a political ideology in Canada, then you have to shut him up somehow, because you don't want him destroying your narrative, because he sounds rational, reasonable, and he's got some justifiable anger. There's nothing wrong with being angry with people who will not listen, who are intentionally trying to defame and besmirch not only you, but all the people that you represent, all the voters who voted for him and for your party. There's nothing wrong with being angry about that. So he stands up and he lets them have it with both barrels. Well, if they let that stand, then they have to defend themselves, and they are not very good at trying to defend themselves when challenged with the truth. It's easier to erase the truth and eliminate him than it is. It's the old story of shooting the messenger. And that's what these guys are afraid of. Tactics like this do not come from a position of self-confidence. If you cannot have an argument without getting angry as soon as somebody challenges your perception or your position, then you don't have any self-confidence in it. I'm not saying you never get angry, but I'm saying that if what I think of your position makes you angry without ever considering what it is I'm saying or why, then you have a huge self-confidence problem.
Okay, with that, we're going to have to go for a break. And we may pick this up again in the next segment for a minute or two. We'll see. But stay put, and we will be back in 2 to 3 minutes here in the Combat Zone on Think Radio Network.
.com.
.ca.
Okay. All right, welcome back to the Combat Zone, folks. Boy, that banana bread is good.
Well, you're talk about increasing the volume there on your intro. Like,
oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Just
sorry.
Looking at the levels here on our
just went
on
through
our
the
monitor.
roof, did they?
Okay, it's Okay, we've gone into the too loud to the danger zone there on that one.
Okay, well...
Okay, that's a little bit too much technical information for you guys out there.
They made a great movie with that as the theme song, Highway to the Danger Zone.
Is that the wording for it? Highway to the Danger Zone?
Highway to the Danger Zone.
I know the song you're talking about, but I didn't know that was
do you know the movie comes from? Top Gun.
Tom Cruise.
Yeah, Top Gun, yep. Great. You know what? It's not technically the best movie from a how to fly an airplane kind of movie.
Okay, that where they're flying, one's flying right side up and the other's flying upside down.
That was a great scene, though. That was a brilliant scene.
I don't know. I don't. That's.
I mean, aerodynamic forces being what they were, they probably would have kissed and made a mess. But anyway,
listen. I wanna. Before we move on to the next topic that we wanted to talk about, which is Donald Trump launching his re-election campaign, and it's not entirely unrelated. I think that
it ties in,
but it's getting a little bit on from or carrying on from our conversation in the last segment, Nick, where we're talking about political correctness run amok, and the comparison of conservatives to Nazis, etc. And a completely unsubtle example of this is just in the last week or so in the United States, where people like Alexandria, I can't remember her middle name.
I'm going to leave you hanging for... No, I'm not. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Ocasio-Cortez.
Or AOC, as she is more commonly called.
AOC, right. Well, yep. I wanted to get her name right, and I wasn't sure that middle name.
Airhead on Cortez. I mean, and Alexandria.
Okay. So she's referring to the placement of illegal immigrants to the United States, people who are caught just coming over the border without any kind of paperwork or anything like that,
right.
That they're being held in detention areas or centers, and she's referring to these as concentration camps. And when you and I talked about this earlier today, Nick, and because everybody's saying, "Oh, concentration camps! How could she say that? This is like the Nazis." She's comparing us to the Nazis, and I actually defended her because I had heard a comment where she had been criticized, and she said, "Well, most academics would explain to you that these are, technically speaking, concentration camps." And I had heard that, and I thought, okay, she's actually right, because the term concentration camp originated during the Boer War, where the British were detaining people, and they were putting them in these camps. And of course, there was no brutalization, there were no gas chambers or executions or torture or anything like that. They were camps where people were being concentrated in one area. So technically speaking, these are concentration camps, okay? And I defended her. You will recall that one of Canada's leaders of the alleged leaders of the alt-right, whatever that is, Nick, that I was defending this person.
Do I hear a machine gun in the background and the sound of a plane crashing?
You're waiting for the other shoe to drop. Here's the other shoe to drop, okay? So when I was out before we were doing the show, I was driving and I was listening to another clip of her talking about concentration camps and never again. Okay, and I completely reversed myself, because from a technical point of view, the term concentration camp alone, she would be correct in using that. But when you invoke the term never again,
right,
alongside concentration camps,
now you're talking Holocaust.
You are referring to what the National Socialists, if you guys listen that carefully, National Socialists, okay, in Germany did under Hitler's leadership. Okay, those were concentration camps as well. But when you refer to a concentration camp in the context of never again, okay, that's what you're talking about. And so, again, here she is invoking this notion of conservatives, President Trump and his administration, being akin to Nazis.
Well, here's what one of the things she said is she referred to Trump's administration as detention facilities at the U.S.-Mexico borders are exactly like concentration camps. No, they're not even close.
Well, not in that context. Not in the
no,
context
in
of
the
what
way
they did in
that
Germany.
she's talking about. When she says never again, she's referring to the Holocaust.
Right, and when she said she's not even calling them concentration camps in that quote you just made, she's saying they're like concentration camps. Okay, well then don't You're right. She's accusing the administration of being Nazis.
Yes.
Okay, and that's a pretty bad thing to do. Okay. Am I understating when I say it's a pretty bad thing to do? And
yeah, I would think so.
And then along comes Beto O'Rourke, who is running for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States from Texas. And Beto O'Rourke, I'm listening to a clip of him giving a speech. I don't know what the audience was, but talking it on and on and on about what the Americans did to the St. Louis. Now, for those of you who don't know what the St. Louis was, in 1939, the St. Louis was a ship where a number of Jewish refugees from Germany had obtained visas to go to Cuba. And when they got to Cuba, the Cuban government
turned them away
and wouldn't allow. I think they might have allowed a few off, but they made the allegation that the visas were in fact fake, and they refused to honor them. And so the St. Louis tried to put in to an American port and allow these refugees to claim refugee status in the United States, but they were never allowed. The Coast Guard prevented them from doing that, and the Americans, under, by the way, Franklin Roosevelt, who was a Democratic president, a socialist Democratic president, okay, a member of the Democratic Party, I should make that clear, not a Republican, but a Democrat, refused to allow them in. And in fact, in fair is fair. We're just as guilty here in Canada.
Because we didn't let them in either.
And so they were sent back to Germany, and most of the people who were on that ship died. Now, interestingly enough, I met some of the survivors a number of years later who had come to Canada. They'd done a cross-country tour that was organized by an evangelical Christian group, and basically what they were saying was, we felt bad for what our country did, and we wanted to make amends. That was basically what it was.
The tenor of the trip.
And it was really quite a fascinating thing at the time. But again, Beto O'Rourke is invoking the history of the Nazis to criticize the policies of the United States, somehow or other trying to make this equivalency between the Trump administration and Nazi Germany. Now, surely to goodness, that is going way overboard. And it's not just those of us who happen to be conservatives who should be crying out about this. It should be also sensible, reasonable people on the left, because there are people who are sensible and reasonable on the left. It's not all, craziness. I mean, this is just politics that's just gotten so caustic.
Well, it's part of the reason why it's hard to find people who want to stick their neck in that particular noose when you're looking for people to run for office. Because look at what happened to Michael Cooper. I mean, here's a man trying to do his best, challenges the status quo about how, stands up for what he believes in, and has his head lopped off psychologically.
Nick, can you imagine you and I?
We wouldn't last
Parliament?
a week. We wouldn't last a week.
Well, I think we would, but we'd have to run as independents because I think we would get elected. But I don't think that any political party would have us at this point in time. Anyway.
No, certainly not now. And that's, it's tragic, because not that I'm bucking to become a member of parliament or a member of provincial parliament.
We would both, by the way, guys, we would both accept appointments to the Senate.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm willing to make the sacrifice.
Don't say that when I'm about to take a mouthful of water.
And so
I almost spit it all over my screen.
So is Nick.
I would take a work year at 72 days long for $170,000. I'd make that sacrifice. I would. Wouldn't you? Think about it. I think it's $170,000 a year for, you only got to show up 72 days.
Okay, it's not that simple. They're not that bad. Oh my goodness gracious. Okay. So we've done enough criticizing the left. Let's talk about Donald Trump. Sounds like I wanted to criticize Donald Trump here. I really don't, actually.
Actually,
but So Donald Trump has a rally in Florida last night, at which he announces, as if we didn't know already, he's going to be running for re-election, and he unveils the motto of what the slogan is going to be of the campaign. So, great originality. Last campaign was making America great again. This campaign is going to be
keeping America great.
So okay, simplicity. There's a lot to be said for that. But you know what? This guy is packing arenas, 25, 30, 40,000 seats. And for this particular rally, there were people who were camping out 2 and 3 days in advance.
Just to make sure they got in.
Just to make sure they were able to get in.
And then there was as many people outside on the apron around the theater, around the Coliseum. And I think if it's a football stadium, it's probably bigger than 20,000. I don't think they were playing where the Tampa Bay Lightning play. I think they might have been where the Florida Gators play.
I don't know. I don't think it was that big, but it who cares? Like, when was the last time that you went to a political rally in Canada where they had, 30,000 people or 20,000 people?
On top of that, they were, when you walked, the people who went there, some of them spent 3 days, to get into line. They had tents and they were tailgating and they were selling Trump swag, like buttons and hats and bumper stickers and all this stuff. But there's something about Trump. He knows what it takes to get people fired up. Love him or hate him, he's getting it done. The economy is roaring down there. He's added 5 million jobs. Stocks are worth 50% more today than they were 2 years ago. He's added $9.2 trillion to their economy. I mean, the numbers just keep going and flowing like a river. And people, if there's one thing that wins people over, is watching their personal self-worth personal income go up.
Well,
but the point I'm making is, when you have a gathering on the left, first of all, you're never going to get those kind of numbers. Never. Even if Billy Joel were to do a concert, okay, or Garth Brooks, who did a 500,000-man concert in Central Park a number of years ago, even with him, they couldn't draw those kind of numbers. If you got 500, 1,000, 1,500, that's a lot. Take the rock star away, and the numbers drop to where you're in basements of churches. So Trump comes out, and he is the star. He entertains them for an hour, and they just love it. They eat it up, and when he's done, they don't want to go home. There's a charisma about him that, love him or hate him, and the Democrats certainly have made it with no uncertain terms, the fact that they hate this guy, but the supporters he has, and they're growing in numbers. His numbers are on the rebound and will continue to grow, I think. And to tell you the truth, if I was a betting man right now, I think he wins in a runaway in 2020.
I don't know. I'm not going to bet one way or the other. I've learned not to bet one way or the other.
I'm sticking my neck out. I will tell you that much.
No, it wouldn't surprise me that he wins and he wins big. But I've just learned with Donald Trump not to bet on anything.
Well,
he revels in pissing off his political opponents,
and he's good at it.
You could tell this is a man who enjoys getting under their skin, and they're so gullible. Like they what they don't understand is that they're dealing with somebody who really enjoys getting them riled up. And they'd be a lot better if they were not getting riled up and answering him the way he is. But I go back to, this whole thing about Trump being akin to Hitler. I mean, nobody's actually saying that explicitly like that. Donald Trump is our Adolf Hitler. That would be beyond the pale. But the stuff that I'm hearing and seeing and writing right now from the left, even 12 months ago would have been considered beyond the pale. And consider this, Nick. Consider the avalanche of criticism that would be that we would be subjected to as conservatives if we criticized not Pierre Trudeau, but Justin Trudeau as another Stalin or another Mao Zedong, or having Nazi tendencies, we would be excoriated, not just from the left, but by our own friends on the right. So, there's clearly a double standard, and it's a double standard that we ourselves buy into and practice. Too many of us on the right. I'm running out of things to say about this, Nick. I really am.
Well, here's the bottom line is you're right about the double standard. And first of all, we would never make that analogy, that comparison in the first place, because it's insane. Look, there's no secret how I feel about Justin Trudeau. I think the only thing he's qualified for is to be a used sock salesman. I do not think he is one of the worst prime ministers we've ever had. But to call him Mao or Stalin or Hitler would be outrageous, because he's nowhere near those monsters. And to put him on that level is to insult the memory of the people who died under those monsters, because they truly were evil personified. Now, Justin Trudeau is just a little kid playing on a big man's field.
Yeah, not just Justin, but his whole cabinet.
Well, okay, so the whole it's like watching the Keystone Cops.
Yeah.
Okay, it's funny, it's comical if it wasn't so expensive. But when nobody's calling them these kinds of monsters, like he's not Pol Pot, he's not Mao, he's not Stalin, he's not Hitler. He's just a little boy playing in a big boy's game. And on top of that, to have that standard, we set that standard ourselves. Nobody has to tell us not to do that. We just would never do it, because we know history and we understand that we do not want to denigrate the memory of those people who perished under such horrible circumstances by elevating somebody who lives in a free and open democracy like we have to that kind of monstrosity. It's so outrageous. So when the left does it, nobody ever calls him on it. So when Michael Cooper does, he gets crucified
by his own friends.
Yeah, by his own team. They should have been standing up and applauding. Way to go, Mike.
He didn't call anybody Nazis.
He just said it's not. You got to stop making that comparison.
Right.
Because it's not accurate. And Scheer should have patted the young man on the back and said, "Way to go, buddy. That's how you win a place on my team."
Yeah, well.
He didn't do that, did he?
He didn't do it. I really regret that. I want to go back to Donald Trump, and what you were talking about the economy. I was down there in Washington about a year and a half ago, spent about a week down there doing some business and that. And Nick, I have to tell you, everybody I talked to, they hated Donald Trump.
Yep.
I mean, they really hate Donald Trump.
Uh-huh.
Okay. But I didn't talk. I asked people. I asked a few people in the street, asked somebody in a restaurant, asked, people in the hotel, right? And without fail, they hated Donald Trump. And without fail, Nick, and listen to me now.
Okay.
Without fail, every single one of those people that I spoke to, and there were dozens of them on that week that I would ask them their feelings about Donald Trump as an outsider, as a Canadian, every one of them hated him, and every one of them loved what he was doing with the economy. The number of times I heard, "Oh man, I can't stand that guy. I hate him. He's terrible. But I do like what he's doing with the economy." It was as if they were all talking from the same that they had been briefed in advance, and they were all using.
But how do you look if somebody is raising the standard of living in your country, is putting millions of people back to work, putting millions of dollars back into the economy? How do you hate a guy like that?
Yeah, billions of dollars back.
Yeah, trillions actually. So how do you hate a guy like that? I mean, look,
it's easy to hate him. I'm not saying. Look, I think Donald Trump is an easy person to dislike. Okay,
dislike is different than hate.
Okay, well, so I'm willing to say that for those people out there who are very passionate, I'm willing to say that it's easy to hate the guy. Okay, I don't hate him. I don't. There are things about him I like. There are things about him I don't like. Okay, but I understand that there are some people out there who are going to hate Donald Trump. But the fact is that making money and paying your rent and being able to go on a vacation every year, go camping, and how the fact is that no pun intended, trumps Trump.
Well done. Well done.
Yeah,
You're
just
learning.
gave it to me. I didn't rehearse that. You know,
No, you're learning. You're picking up from
an expert. That would be you.
That's right. You're looking a lot less like a two-legged horse in a four-legged race.
And getting back to my comment about people, almost as though they've been briefed and they all have talking points, and they're saying, I hate Trump, but I love what he's doing with the economy. You know, flipping back to this whole thing about Trump is a Nazi, etc. This is only the last couple of weeks where this concentration camp, the St. Louis, and I've heard a few people talking about concentration camps actually now. It's as though they've all gotten this from one person, and they're all just reading the talking points as well.
It's like they can't think for themselves. It's like this is the ultimate in lemmings going over the cliff.
Well, anybody who thinks that what they're doing in the United States is even remotely similar to what happened in Germany, even pre-war Germany, it's not just that they're not thinking for themselves, they're just not thinking at all.
And they certainly haven't picked up a history book.
But I'm glad you said that, because I actually think that that's as much of the problem as anything else. It's not that they hate the guy and that they're just saying these things because they really believe it. I mean, or that they want to. Sorry, I shouldn't mean to say that they really don't really believe it. I actually think they do believe it. I think they do believe it because they don't know the history.
Yeah.
They are poorly educated. I think that's one of the biggest problems we're facing in society today in Western democracies and free countries is the uneducated masses who go through so many years of schooling, primary school, secondary school, post-secondary, postgraduate school. So we have never had a more allegedly educated society than we have today, and I can't think of any time in modern history where they've been so ignorant.
Well, see, the people are highly educated, but they're missing huge chunks in their education. Look at biology, just as an example. How do you think they get away with selling this whole climate scare nonsense? Is because people don't understand biology and photosynthesis and the role that carbon dioxide gas plays. They don't have a good grasp of history. They don't even know their own. Like if you were to walk down the street and ask the average person to name just one Canadian VC winner. I don't care who, pick one. There's 94 of them. Pick one. Tell me. You don't even have to know how he won it. You don't have to know where he came from or what he did to win it. Just name one. They can't. Tell me how many people would know who invented insulin or, who invented the telephone. They don't even know. There's so much. They know all. The way I like to put it is they know how to recycle a can, hug a tree, and how to save the planet, but they don't know anything about their own history and their own culture.
And unfortunately, they don't know the first thing about how to recycle a can.
Well, that's also true. They think they do.
They think they do.
Yeah.
It's all cliche. It's all cliches.
They don't teach critical thinking, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, you said it, Nick. Okay, break time again.
You got it.
We will be back in a few minutes here in the Combat Zone on thinkradio.ca. Nick, we're going to have to change that break music from that Paganini piece. It's just not it's not exciting enough. I just feel my energy level going down as I'm listening to it. It's beautiful music, beautiful violin music. But if you're listening to this on the podcast, during the break when you would have heard a commercial. Or you may not have. It depends whether there's actually a commercial inserted during that period. But during the breaks in the live broadcast, we play music to help people, either get their blood pressure up or get them calm
if you
down.
want
That's
to,
very common music.
You could always replace it with Hammer to Fall by Queen.
Yeah, well, there's lots of music we could have. We should do a heavy metal night just for the fun of it. Get a little Ted Nugent in there.
Here's an idea.
Of course, we'd have to bleep half of the words out.
Yeah, well, that. The other thing you could do is do a theme night. Like one night you do heavy metal, the next night you do Celtic, then you could do some jazz, then you could do some country.
I thought about Celtic music tonight, actually. I was going to do a revamp of some of the break music, but I never got around to it. And, of course, the thing is that nobody who listens to our podcast after the live broadcast
gets to hear
any of that.
Yeah, but we do.
Yeah, we get to listen to it, and our live listeners. So there's a reason why people should listen live, right there.
Absolutely. They get the best break music.
They get to follow our theme.
It's the best break music, or bumper music, as we call it.
We'll go to a country western night.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Okay. Christmas time, we'll do Christmas music. Maybe we might even do that for a few weeks in a row.
Hey, Christmas doesn't end, is not just... See, I think Christmas should go from December 10th until the 25th. 10 days. That's enough.
Okay, well, then we'll do 2 weeks.
Yep.
And summer is officially with us in a couple of days.
Yes.
Which means the days are getting shorter starting this week. So winter is on its way.
Please don't rush it.
No, but I think maybe next week we'll do a Beach Boys. Let's do a Beach Boys theme. Are we running out of things to talk about?
No,
here?
We're not.
No.
We're just having some fun with this idea. Actually, the next topic on the list, if my memory serves me correctly, is do not flush your goldfish down the toilet. And it's a bit of a lighthearted. It's
lighthearted, but it's very serious.
It is serious. Okay. Now,
the OSPCA could be after you.
First of all, the story is that in New York, somebody was fishing in the
New York State.
City. And yeah, that's right, near Buffalo. That guy was fishing and he caught a 14-inch goldfish. Now that's a big goldfish.
In the Niagara River.
In the Niagara River. Now the thing that kind of bugged me about this story was it was an American news outlet, and they called it New York State. The New York State River, or the Niagara River, was a New York State river. No, it's not. It's an international boundary. It's a short river. It only goes from let's say the top of Niagara Falls, where Lake Erie dumps over the edge, down the catacombs, and through the river where the Maid of the Mist is, out into Lake Ontario.
Okay, but
that's pretty much the end of the Niagara River.
It's a few miles long.
It's not the Columbia by any stretch.
It's not the Columbia River,
right? Or the St. Lawrence.
It may be. Well, it's wider than the Jock River.
It's deeper than the Holler.
Okay.
Wider than the river. Taller than the pine tree, growing tall upon the hill.
So what's the canal?
The Welland.
The Welland Canal. Good for you.
Yep. The Welland Canal, and as Lowell would say, where does St. Lawrence Seaway begin and end?
Go on, I'm listening.
It starts in Duluth, Minnesota, and it ends at the Locks of Montreal.
Okay, good for you.
Well, I don't know much, as my grandfather used to say, but I do know a few things.
Okay, we have to talk about this goldfish problem and flushing your pets down the toilet. But before we do, I just want to remind everybody, since we are referencing Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, again...
I know where you're going.
Do not panic. The flooding of the rising level of Lake Ontario is not due to climate change. It is not an indication that sea levels are rising.
If the sea levels rise enough to flood Lake Ontario, everything from Ontario to Halifax is underwater.
Well, largely. Because Lake Ontario, guys, I think we talked about this the last week or 2 weeks ago, but it's worth repeating. Lake Ontario is 243 feet above sea level, which means that everything
at that or lower
would have to be flooded, which means that we here in Ottawa are safe because we're 270 feet above sea level, but we would be living on an island. And if that
Montreal's
was the case,
gone,
this would
Kingston's gone, Toronto's gone.
Now this is a shout out for you, Lowell Green. If you're listening, we really would be the island of sanity.
You never know who's listening. You just never know. Anyway, to get back to the story about the carp, it's funny.
No, goldfish.
Oh, well, goldfish is just a fancy carp.
Okay, goldfish.
Anyway.
Goldfish.
Goldfish. Okay, fine. Somebody didn't want the goldfish anymore, so they put it in the toilet and they flushed it and went, bye-bye, Goldie.
I'm not sure that's what happened, by the way.
When you
flush down the toilet, you go through a whole purification process. It doesn't just go from your toilet out into, Lake Erie to drain down.
That does it. Goldfish are tough.
No, well, yeah, there's tough and there's tough. No, people. The reason I'm saying this, Nick, is because years ago, as you know, I did quite a bit of diving, scuba diving, etc. We used to. There was a group of us that from time to time we'd take our equipment and we'd go to a local quarry where people would swim and stuff like that.
Right.
And we would do some practicing diving, etc. And doing different things. And at nighttime we'd do some different activities and that. I remember going one night to this quarry, and it was about 15 feet deep, so not particularly deep. And a couple of us were underwater and going around with our flashlight. And I had never seen this before, but we got swarmed by goldfish in this quarry.
Attracted by the light.
Okay, yeah, and these goldfish were they weren't 14 inches, but they were 6, 7 inches, 8 inches. They were big goldfish. And afterwards, I came out and I said, "What is with that?" And the guy I was with said, "Oh yeah, goldfish will actually grow much larger than what you see in your little fish tank.
Oh, yeah.
The reason they're so small in the fish tank is because they don't grow larger in a confined environment. But
they only grow to the size they can survive.
They will get much larger. So I think that somebody threw their goldfish in the river or whatever.
It could be. There's a story here I'm looking at out of Kentucky. There's a private lake in Kentucky where a guy caught a 20-pounder. A goldfish, and he's holding it up with both hands, and it's a big, thick fish. Now, they're saying, look, if you can't handle your pets, because they're considered an invasive species, because they grow so fast, they push other species out of the way, nature has a way of balancing things out. And sometimes it takes a while, but let me give you the case of the zebra mussel. If you remember back when I was growing up in southern Ontario, the lakes were considered dead. It was carp and sheephead was all that was in it. You might have got a few bass if you knew where to go, but the lakes were polluted. They were dead. They looked like a puddle.
Right.
Then the zebra mussels came along, and there were zillions of them. And each one, about the size of your baby fingernail, would filter a quart of water a day. And in their billions, they cleaned up the lakes because they cleaned the sediment out of the water, allowed sunshine to penetrate deeper into the water. Plant life took off, and they brought the lakes back. Then bass figured out, hey, those make nice light snacks, and started to eat them. So nature has a way of balancing these things. So really, they're saying, look, if you can't handle your pet, whether it be a fish or an iguana or a snake, don't release it into the wild, because you don't know what kind of consequences you're going to call. And when it comes to especially fish, if you've got a goldfish that's 3 inches long that you don't want anymore, dig a hole in the backyard, drop them in it, say, bye, Goldie, and fill in the hole. Don't throw it in the watercourse. It's just a goldfish.
Now, wait a minute. Surely you're not suggesting that you bury your goldfish alive.
Well, you kill it first.
Okay, that's a terrible thing to say on air, Nick, because somebody's going to report you. And they're going to be raiding your farm. You know that. Because if you're going to be that cruel to a goldfish, what are you going to do to your horses?
Nothing.
And I'm only half joking, This is dangerous.
I know.
We veered into dangerous territory here.
But the point I'm making is there's a very simple solution. People catch smelt in their millions, and a lot of them end up in gardens as fertilizer.
Okay.
So what's the difference?
Well,
it's an invasive species. You want to get rid of it?
Listen, I'm not questioning that. I'm just saying, this is a dangerous... You're treading on dangerous territory here.
I'll tread even further. I'll walk out into this landmine, into this minefield. Here in Ottawa, we have a huge problem with geese. So what?
Yes.
So what did
I
the
was
city...
walking on the front lawn here the other day, last week, Nick, and you had these little black holes or whatever in the line. I don't know what it was, okay? But from when I was walking up, the only thing I could think of was, you have Canada geese on your front lawn somewhere? Because they are the dirtiest.
Oh, they're disgusting.
It's unbelievable.
And they're nasty birds. I had to actually fight one off.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
The gander came after me. He came up off the ground, and so I just hauled off and I punched him right in the chest.
Well, that's what you have to do.
Yeah, you have to, because he was coming after me.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't punch him hard enough to hurt him. I just knocked him back down.
Swans are very vicious, too.
Yeah, you got to do the same thing with them.
Yeah, I'm not, by the way, you can't see this, guys, but I'm not smiling. I'm dead serious.
Oh, yeah. This is not funny. Because if you don't do that, any animal that lives in a flock or a herd when you enter their territory, they think you want to become part of the flock or the herd, and they want to put you in a lower place than they are. That's where the term pecking order comes from. So in order to make sure that gander knew that when I walked out of the building, because he had a little nest right in this little turnaround in the driveway, him and his wife decided they were going to try and raise their young there. And he came after me, so I knocked him down. He came up again. I knocked him down again. And after that, all I had to do was look at him. And he would hiss at me, but he would back up. And we got along fine after that. Anyway, the point is, you have to understand animals are animals. And fish, especially goldfish, if they're causing that much trouble, don't add to it. Dig a little hole, stomp on the goldfish, get it over with, make it fast. Throw in the hole, bury it. Put it under your roses.
You know, I was just thinking to myself, Nick, that we might have the idea here for a new reality show.
Go on.
I'm thinking of the name of it, but I just picture, goose attacks or something like that.
Oh.
You know? True story of swan attacks.
Yeah.
Some of these things, some of these animals, like people don't realize, but some of these really pretty, beautiful, cute, cuddly animals that are absolutely the most vicious, if not dangerous, animals that are out there.
Well, you know that the biggest threat to songbirds, you know what it is? It's domestic house cats.
Okay.
When you let Fluffy out at night, he's going bird hunting.
Well, there you go.
Because that's what cats do.
Sure.
So if you liked that little budgie or that little finch that was singing outside your window, and one morning it's not there, and Fluffy comes in with a little yellow feather sticking out of his mouth, you'll know what happened to the finch. That's what they do. They are very, very, they get to, how do I put it? Their natural hunting instincts, they get to act on them.
Right.
Because inside your house, if you have any birds, they're usually in cages. They can't get at them. All of this for free. See this information we give away for free? What's the matter with us? We should be charging for this.
Now, the question, of course, is if you want to get rid of your goldfish, there's the Nick Vandergraat method. Okay. But what is the alternative? Like, you can't take the goldfish back to the store, which is what the guys writing this article, they advise. Take it back to the store. The stores don't take these things back, okay?
They're trying to get rid of them.
And that's number one. And number two, you can't take them to your local Humane Society. Okay, the Humane Society does not accept goldfish. And if they do, I hate to be the bringer of bad news, okay? But the Humane Society doesn't keep those fish around for very long. They don't keep the cats around for very long. They don't keep the dogs around for very long.
You know who's the worst? Is PETA. They run animal shelters, and over 90% of the animals who come through the front door go out the back door in a box.
Well, I don't know about a box, Nick, but I tell you, I know what they do with them here. After they give them that little injection,
yep,
it's off to the crematoria.
That's what I'm talking about.
Right.
It's exactly what I'm talking about. Everybody thinks, well, we'll give it to the Humane Society.
And I'm not saying that because I want to accuse them of being, Nazis or anything like that.
Well, you only have
what they really do.
Yeah. Well, and I can understand why they do it. You only have, because how many times have you seen it? Especially, let's take rabbits as an example. Easter time comes along. You got little 3-year-old Janie, and she loves bunnies. So you go get her a real one. And you think you're going to be dad or the parents of the decade for getting little Janie that bunny. But what they fail to think through is, what is it going to take the day after? She's only 3 or 4 years old. She's going to lose interest. Then who's going to take care of the rabbit? Because it still needs to have the cage changed. It still needs to be fed and watered.
We've been through this, Nick.
A million people
sure
have.
You've been too.
We've got rabbits at home right now. Now my daughter's very good at taking care of them.
Right.
She's 14. She's responsible. And she takes care of them, the sheep, the goats. I mean, all those animals are all her responsibility.
Hamsters, guinea pigs.
No, we don't have any of those.
No, we did.
Oh, did you? They're tasty.
And you know what the guinea pig really, the guinea pigs would go crazy. Okay. Like, they knew when they were going to be fed, because we keep this old lettuce and stuff like that in the fridge. Okay. So it wouldn't go too bad too quickly. And when you'd come home, and the guinea pig was in this corner in the kitchen of the cage, and it was quiet and not doing anything, and then you'd open the fridge, and then it would hear that plastic bag getting, and it would go crazy. My goodness gracious. The things about guinea pigs.
Well, when I was growing up on the farm, we had pigs, and we had our own cow. And whenever I would go out to milk the cow, which was every day, twice a day.
Did you milk by hand?
Yes.
Good man.
That's why I was always able to beat Lowell in the milking contest. I never went up against him head to head, but I always had more milk in the same time than he did.
But Lowell probably did milking.
I'm sure he did. But I was just better at it than he was.
Yeah.
Anyway, I go out to the barn, and my dad was just amazing. Like, he could milk the cow in 10 minutes. Took me 45. And you'd put that stainless steel bucket under the cow, and the pigs are behind you in the little pen, because we only had about 3 or 4. And we would feed the excess milk, because there was no way a family of 5 could drink 5 gallons of milk a day. We got 2.5 in the morning and 2.5 at night. And it's just way too much. So we give the excess to the pigs. As soon as they heard that milk hit...
That's pretty big. That's pretty good for one cow.
Yeah, well, it was a pretty big cow. And believe me, we put as much of that to use as possible. Talk about amazing butter. And once you've had milk that way, that doesn't get pasteurized and doesn't go through the dairy process.
Okay.
Just straight from the cow into the fridge. There's nothing wrong with it. The cow's healthy. It's the best milk in the world. Anyway,
yeah, don't listen
soon as
to
that
him.
sound,
I had a lot of that milk.
It
doesn't matter. It doesn't taste like milk. It tastes like cow. But
but it's supposed to. It comes from cow.
I know. If you like the taste of cow in your milk, then it's great.
I did. Anyway, as soon as the pigs heard that milk hit the bottom of the pail, oh my God! You'd think you'd think somebody had stuck them with a knife. They'd be up with their paws on the edge of the rail, and I'd turn over my shoulder. I'd squirt the milk right into their mouth, and they'd be going as fast as I could pour it to them.
And yes, ladies and gentlemen, Nick is acting this out as he recites the story.
Oh, yes. So, but animals, in other words, animals take a lot of care. And you can't, too many people enter into animal ownership without a full understanding or even a partial understanding of what they're getting into. And we see it in all kinds of animals, in horses, in dogs, and in cats, and in gerbils, and in you name the animal that you can have as a pet, and people will go out on a spur of a moment, make an emotional decision because they see this cute little thing in a pet store, then bring it home and go, oh my God, what did I get myself into? Because now all the work starts. And that's what's wrong with this idea of flushing goldfish down the toilet.
One of our daughters really, really wanted to have a pet frog until she realized that she had to feed it insects.
That's right.
And that frog went back.
You know what?
There's a story, of course. My wife wanted to return the frog, and she ended up going into this store, calling and saying, "Would you take it back?" And I think they said no. She went to the store anyway, and just walked in with the cage and everything.
So set it on the counter and walked out?
Put it down, said, "It's yours," and walked out. What do you folks think happened to that frog? I don't know. I hate to speculate. Look, Nick, we have a couple of housekeeping things we got to talk about here before we sign off.
Okay.
Because it's getting close to the top of the hour.
Yes, it is.
And that is that we've been talking here a lot about our format and the show and how we can improve things. And we've come to a decision that we're going to take our 2-hour show on Wednesday nights, and we're going to actually cut it back to 1 hour. And we love the interaction. We love being able to work with you guys and in our chat room and that, and you know, the odd time when we actually get live phone calls, etc. They're wonderful, and we really love doing that. But 2 hours is a long time, and so we want to tighten things up a little bit, so that's kind of a decision that we've decided to make. As you heard at the beginning of the show, or towards the end of the first segment with Tom Harris, Tom is actually going to be producing his own, or we're going to produce it. I think that his podcast for him, his own podcast, and he'll be talking about a number of things from climate change, which he's, you know, space exploration, which, you know, this is his background, is in this kind of scientific field. And I can't wait to hear how he incorporates the odd musical piece.
Well, he's a pretty good singer.
Well, you know, when he was on with us the last time, he had his guitar and he was doing a little bit of singing. Yeah. So it's an interesting thing. It'll be a little eclectic, but we're looking forward to bringing him on board.
We're a lot of things. Eclectic is one of them.
And we have a couple of other things that are sort of in the hopper, and so we're going to be bringing you guys a more variety of different programming in that as we move forward over the next month or so. But we wanted to give everybody a heads up that we're going to be changing not the format, but we're going to be cutting back from a 2-hour show to a 1-hour show starting next week.
Yeah, and there will be other things coming along, as Joseph's alluding to. There's another podcast in the works. I'm not going to get into what it's about yet or who's going to do it or anything like that. That's all part of the program, and we'll reveal that as it's nearing fruition. There's a couple other things that we want to do, Joseph and I want to do, in the realm of political conversation. So we're going to have more information on that as it develops as well. So we're trying to make the show better, more interesting, and make it something appealing to a wider audience, and certainly grow the audience we already have.
Yeah. So we're not going away. We're just changing things up a little bit. We're still going to stick with our Wednesday night format. But what we need from you, ladies and gentlemen, our listeners, our loyal listeners, is for you to tell other people about what we're doing here. Because what we want to grow what we're doing. We don't want it to just be Think Radio being, 1 or 2 or 3 podcasts. We want to have more podcasts. We want to have more live shows. But we want to reach more people. And, there are things that we could do to help reach more people. But really, it's you, our loyal listeners, that are the backbone of what we do. And, we're very thankful for you. We appreciate you. And we're asking you to please tell your friends about us, okay? It doesn't matter whether you're listening live. We'd love to have more live listeners. We always like to have live listeners. But if you're listening to us in a rebroadcast on the podcast you've downloaded, share the podcast, share the URL, tell other people about us. We want not just for us reaching them, but we want to hear back from more and more people out there who we haven't had a chance to reach yet through this particular show.
Onward and upward, I think is the phrase.
Onward and upward. And if anyone has a copy of From the Ground Up, okay, out there that they'd like to send to Nick, you can go ahead and send it through us.
And if you know what that is, then I don't need to say any more. If you don't know what that is, that's a pilot. That is a ground school book for aspiring pilots. And one of my goals in life is to become a full-fledged pilot so I can fly my own plane. It's not going to happen tomorrow. There's other more important priorities right now, but I love to fly, and I'm going to learn. So if you've got a copy of that book that you don't mind parting with, it's called From the Ground Up, and certainly let us know. Message me, and we'll make arrangements to pick it up and take care of it from there.
And just as a parting comment, I see that Marin has a great suggestion for us: become YouTubers. And Marin, we're actually talking about getting into the video market. I don't know that we're going to do it with this show, but here's the problem. Okay, just a little caveat. Right now, I don't know how welcome we're going to be on YouTube.
But there's other platforms out there that we can use.
Absolutely, there are other platforms, and who knows? Maybe we might be launching our own platform in the near future too.
One way or the other, we'll get the job done.
Stand by.
That's right.
Okay. Anyway, Nick, another great show. Thanks to Tom Harris, our guest.
Yes.
And to all of you guys out there who participated in tonight's show. We love you, and come on,
love
Nick.
you, man.
Come on, Nick, say something. You're always letting me close the show down here.
You do such a good job of it.
Okay.
All right. With that, we're going to wrap it up tonight. Thanks for listening, folks. We'll see you all again next Wednesday, right here on the Combat Zone.
In the Combat Zone.
In
the Combat Zone on Think Radio.
There you go.
Network.
That's the way it works.
Okay. And God bless all you.
Amen to that.